A word of note before this episode. At the time of its recording, there was snow present on the ground. There is protocol that some stories can only be told during the winter months. Out of respect for this protocol, we have edited out the name of these stories and replaced it with the sound of footsteps walking through the snow. Thanks and enjoy our conversation.
Welcome everyone to Masinahikan iskwêwak. We are back for another episode. I'm Kayla and I'm here with my fellow podcast host, and we are actually live on location once again. We got out of our studio,
my house, Sheila's basement,
and we are actually in the lovely home of a very interesting individual who I went to school with, and we'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay. Thanks for that compliment.
You're welcome.
Welcome everyone to our nation. This is the Ermineskin Cree Nation. It literally means by the willows. And what they're describing is a house down by the powwow grounds where there's a willow patch, because that's where the first Inak chief, one of our recognized Inak chiefs, lived. And so when we called the band, where's this band, from? Like we just, the chief lives over here. And that's kind of what we're saying. But the official title is Ermineskin. So we named after the chief. So welcome to Ermineskin.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Pleasant Prairie. My grandpa was contacted by a surveyor back in the 50s about what they call that road, or what they call this place. And he was like, I think he said Maskwacis. And he said, this is a Pleasant Prairie. So they named this road, the county road, Pleasant Prairie Road. Back in the day, the 80s, they used to have a sign there. We've been living here in this territory forever, but in this particular part of this nation since the 50s. So this house was built in 1978? So we keep her going. Hopefully we get a new roof.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
100-year-old home problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll get a new roof,
Not quite sure where the squirrels are coming in either, but that's like another thing that we gotta deal with.
I'm so glad we don't have squirrels around here or raccoons.
Oh, yeah.
Holy crap. That would freak me out.
Yeah, no, we got a squirrel problem.
So, yeah. I'm Josh Littlechild. My dad is Marvin Littlechild. My mom's Patricia Goodwill. My dad's dad was Victor and Alice. And my mom's parents were John and Stella Goodwill. That's where I come from. Welcome here. Oh, that's my intro. Oh, you want to know my traditional name?
Yeah, sure.
My traditional name is Tatanka Wakami Chasha. That means holy white buffalo boy, or man, I guess. I was given that name in this living room back in 85, when I was about 2 or 3. We had a holy man, or like a man from South Dakota come up with his drum group, and they recorded a drum album in this living room. I remember getting kicked out because I wanted to listen, but they recorded it, and then I got a name from Gary Holybull and a song.
Okay.
And they gave me a pipe and a stick.
This living room's seen a lot of things, hey?
Oh yeah. I was like, well, yeah, we recorded a couple albums in here. Like, let's go again.
History is made here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for welcoming us so warmly.
We're super excited to come out here and actually get to be out here in this community, because it's always nice going to communities and not just being stuck in the city or
in the university.
Oh,
the university, yeah.
That's every time we visit the city, I like it for about 3 or 4 hours, and I'm like, I want to go home. It's just so much stimulation.
Yeah. And that whole time, driving home, you're just passing by all the points that on your way home, and you're just ready to get there. I drive into the driveway of our place, and I'm just home. And everything from the day is just gone, in the driveway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds so nice. When I come home, it's just chaos.
I mean, it can be chaos depending on what's happening that day, but usually by the time I hit the driveway, because it takes me an hour to drive home from work, by the time I hit the driveway, I'm like, okay, well, the work day is gone, and and listening to the radio for an hour, doing that kind of stuff. So letting it go.
As you know, Josh, we talked a little bit about this once before we started recording, but we're doing a podcast about writing, editing, and publishing Indigenous stories. So I guess we can start out pretty broadly and see if you have any experience with stories and storytelling.
Yeah, my father is a storyteller. He tells a lot of stories. And it was funny, we were just talking about a story about parenting. This morning at breakfast, my father asked me to tell that story to my nieces that were there. And it's more, like, for me, it's a parenting story, but it's a matriarchal kind of story that really fulfills the matriarchal, like the woman role, which is a sacred role. And I feel like I was almost out of place for telling the story, but it has some duality in it for both male and female parents. And the story goes, and I'll share it with you. So, and like a lot of older elders around here that speak Cree, that are ESL Cree, you know, English is their second language and they're born Cree, they'll pick that story. The story goes, so this one woman, and it's a famous story, everyone knows this story. It's about a parent, be he a man or a woman or both. They were raising their child and they were constantly spoiling their child. So when the child would get in trouble, the parents would intervene and fight for their kid. Even if their kid was in the wrong, they would constantly fight for their children. In Cree parenting, like the way you raise people, or Cree, the adage from the elders is usually, you know, you're never supposed to fight for your kids. Don't fight your kids, fight. You let your children grow and experience these things. You know, you could only do certain things up to a point. You know, they have to learn on their own, right? Sometimes these experiences. But it's never good when you don't allow these children of yours to experience these things and you don't allow them to make mistakes and stuff. So they started a story, you know, these parents are really not letting this child come into the world and experience these things because they're always intervening. And they spoiled the kid. They spoiled the kid rotten. The kid didn't listen. The kid thought he knew it all. I didn't want to hear any of the stories or any of the songs from their community. And one day that child died, and the parents were very sad because they couldn't save their kid from death. And at the funeral, the hand of the child comes out of the grave. And it comes up out of the dirt. And the parents had a choice. Either they let their kid die and follow natural law, or spoil the kid and pull him out and let him live.
What did they choose?
Well, how about I'll leave it open-ended? I'll leave it open-ended, okay? Yeah, so you could kind of really think about that. And, you know, more or less, what would you choose? What is the right thing to do?
I just flashed back to Pet Cemetery, and I'm like,
yeah, everyone's Pet Cemetery. Yeah, so that's one that's I kind of leave it as a cliffhanger because, you know, well, what is the right thing to do, right? If you spoil your kid all the time, would it be right to pull the kid out, or is it do you let natural law take place and let the kid go internment? Well, you know, those are some of the stories that are around here, and you know, they have different meanings and they sound differently when they're explained in Cree, and I'm sure same thing with Michif stories like that. You know, they have different meaning when you hear them in your language. Eh?
Mm-hmm. I liked the dark turn though. Like, I don't know why that fed my soul in a weird way.
You know, and that's what I love about our culture is that the good and the bad coexist at the same time. And you can't. You have to use the bad to explain the good. Mm-hmm. You know, and you can't get rid of one. You can't get rid of the other. They both coexist, and it's just a matter of balance at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're sitting in the room, surrounded by pictures of, I'm assuming, your children. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
How has this story affected your kids? Have you told it to them yet?
The story, these ones, you know, I haven't told them of the story yet. I'm just trying to let them live life and not let them fall out of their own consequences of their actions. You know, I try to do that as I let them experience it as much as they can, because my job as a parent, unlike a fur parent, is not to confine the child and strip it of all of its resources, so I become the sole dependent. It's solely dependent on me for it to live. Yeah. My job is to have these kids ready to be prepped to go out in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, leave. And so I'm trying to build them enough skills to cope with that. So one day when they're ready to hear it, I'll tell them the story, and maybe it'll resonate with them. You know, we talk a lot about and I shouldn't even. Well, there's snow on the ground, so I can say it.
Yeah.
So we talk about, you know, in the Sioux way too. There's Okdomi, you know, stories like that. Nana Bijou. Actually, this is the first Sundance year I Sundanced with the Sioux out in Alexis.
Okay.
That was the sacred tree there.
Yeah.
We were allowed to take pictures because the pipes weren't out.
Oh, okay.
The Sioux have a very different approach to Sundancing. I find it's not as esoteric as the Crees. They're very open, and they want people to come of all cultures to experience it because their way is the right way.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, how did you get this picture? But okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's a different approach. It's not better than the other. It's just a different way of seeing it. So yeah, we share a lot of things with them. I think Grant's been using the crap out of that picture in his
I've
research.
seen that photo of you and your son at the powwow.
Yeah.
Everywhere because it's such a great photo too.
It's sweet.
Yeah.
I had a couple of professors at his party tell me like, oh yeah, we've used that photo tons. I recognize you from the photo. I'm like, what photo? What are you talking about?
Well, we might post a photo if we're allowed to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
we'll probably take one later.
Yeah.
Maybe with the chickens.
Yeah, do it. Watch out for that rooster though. He's vicious.
Troublemaker.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll charm him.
Yeah, do it.
But I think so sometimes stories come at different times, but there definitely are like stories that you are sharing with your kids now.
Yeah.
Probably about like, because we can see like
Oh, sorry.
the photos of like powwow dancing and like your son's hunting now. So I think there are probably definitely some stories that come just at certain ages of like a child's life and that they need to learn at certain points.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, you know, the biggest one my dad's good at is the pubescent stories. That's a really big milestone, and I'm a firm believer a culture is really lost when they lose their coming of age ceremonies for men and women. And coming of age ceremonies out here are still very well practiced, especially for the ladies. For the men, you know, the pubescent stuff. Puberty is it's a big one that we got to still maintain. And, you know, there's a lot of stories behind that too. You know, that has to be talked about. Sexuality, you know, it really affects the social circle of a family and other families too. When kids are going into that, and that's when the kinship really starts, you know, kicking in, and you start learning about, you know, your family stories and how you're all related and how that will Wilcotuin is like, you know. Well, I guess all your kinship, you know, is brought into the picture for that individual, and those stories of your ancestors and how you got here. Actually, I had my first cousin bring her husband, who's from Onion Lake, tell me a story about. I know how I'm related to him now, but we both have relations that at the Frog Lake Massacre. You know, he had an oral story about the account of what happened, and he was talking about. You know, when it was actually about, it was more about women. Men were messing around with women more, and food. The food was just a factor of it that they were distributing in the Chicken Dance Society, I guess, in that tribe. When the chicken, I think it was the Chicken Society. When you mess with one Chicken Society member, you picked a whole fight with every member of that society. So when they were doing that conflict between the woman, the wife, the food was a part of it, but. They basically threw down that ultimatum and killed those men. Captured, and then there's more stories, you know, about the women, you know, that they captured. And you know, my dad has those stories too. And I was been told those stories when I was like in high school. I remember those stories. He would phone me and tell me those stories, or I'd sit down with him when he'd pick me up from the airplane because I was going to boarding school at that time. And there was not a lot of First Nations culture, anything at that school. So he would, you know, make sure I would read books about where we come from and maintain the stronghold of my identity while I was there. It was pretty good, and it's through a lot of stories like books or over the phone or just going on drives and listening. Even today it's more or less talking about how we're related. These stories, every relation, every relative I have, there's usually a story associated with them. So it's important to talk about that when you're talking about kinship. There's stories, and you remember those stories. You actually remember those actions because you're thinking about the person, but then you're putting them into an action or an adventure, right? And be like, oh yeah, that's how you're related, like everyone does. Mm-hmm. It's important, especially in Cree. One thing I think of is you don't address anybody by their first name. You just go straight their title, how you're related to them. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. So storytelling, it's everywhere. Everyone has a story. My niece just asked me about research this morning, and I gave them a story. I gave them a story about what we talked about being spoiled, but I really had to give it to them because I told them, when you're going out asking for, knowledge, as an Indigenous researcher, give people tobacco every time. Because they're going to ask you where you're coming from, and you're representing our people. You're representing our tribe. You have to conduct yourself in a sacred and holy manner when you walk, when you talk, when you think. And when you're taking in this research, treat it like it's sacred and holy. And what does it mean to you? Because some people are going to lay some really heavy stuff on you. And then what are you going to do with it? It made me really happy. They're like, well, we're going to give it back to the people. And I was like, yes.
That's a way.
I was like, I don't have to tell them that. These kids know what to do. The kids are all right. The kids are all right.
The kids are all right.
I mean, that seems to be a constant theme, like protocol and stories and traditional knowledge. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the different types of protocol outside of tobacco. And like you said, the snow on the ground has to be there for Massaquachek stories. You can't take photos at a Sundance. Those types of things that I'm just picking up that are really important that I think that everyone needs to know when they're dealing with Indigenous storytelling.
I call it cultural red tape.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good name for it. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There's things you do and there's things you don't. And I was explaining this to my nieces this morning. When we conduct research, in my line of work, many a times we have to go speak with elders. Many a times we have to go speak with nation members. And they're not necessarily elders, but when we do so, no matter how they came to be a part of this community, or how they where their stance is in the community, whether if you're a classist, like where they sit in the class scheme, everyone here is treated with the same respect because it reflects on yourself. So when we go out and give protocol like tobacco, say, to an elder to go listen to their stories about the topic, it's kind of one of those things where you got to sit down and be ready to stay there the whole day. Because you don't know if you're going to sit and talk briefly about the subject and be like, okay, see you later, after 5 minutes. Or you're going to sit down with like 3 pots of tea, round after round, and just listen and just listen and just listen. Because these stories, I think elders have to trifecate huge stories to extract like very poignant stuff, because you need to understand the whole thing to understand where you are. And I ran into that once. I was asked to speak at the Canadian National Humane Conference on our dog program. So I went to go see an elder, and I literally just said, well, I want to talk about humility, like just treating animals in a humane way. I sat there for like 4 hours with him, and I learned about the creation story. I learned about the dog's role in the creation of the universe in the Cree perspective. I learned about Wokotowin, the true meaning of Wokotowin. I learned about this meticulous count, that we have when the universe is created. I learned about why we need to identify as Cree people the spirit in everything, like everything. And we need to identify our relationship with that. And in that is humility. And that humanity, that acting humane, that's when you identify that. So it goes way more than treating a dog nice. Mm-hmm. It's a way you conduct yourself entirely. And so I was like, oh my God, how am I going to explain this to a bunch of people? And I got like 30 minutes to do this.
Yeah.
Storytelling really gives you perspective, in our research about our ideology or our cosmology or philosophies, whatever you're trying to pull out and put it in, in my case, it's a lot of law. I have a wonderful manager that that has a beautiful philosophy on developing law. And we try to research with the elders first to talk about what Cree practices and Cree customs are, and how does that reflect in common law, like modern Indigenous binary jurisprudence law. What does that look like? Rather than just having a corporate law and just throwing it in there, we need grassroots people telling us about what's in convention, what's in practice, and how we pull that out. So a lot of it has to do with researching with elders. And one time I asked an elder, when I started working here, I forgot. I asked an elder to meet with him and come to an event over the phone. And he proceeded to give me crap for about 20 minutes about why I have to do it in person. It was very stern and long-winded. And man, did I feel like I put my tail between my legs that day. About why you need to come see people in person acquiring knowledge, because it's that connection, and it's giving them the respect and the honor, because they're transferring you knowledge, right, rather than doing it over the phone. And boy, he gave it to me, and I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that, because I just slipped up, right? I thought I could have organized it with just a phone call. But yeah, so for us, learning stories, it's important because they hold a lot of our sacred knowledge, and they hold a lot of our language. There's the kids.
They want to join in.
Yeah, they want to join in.
Yeah, if they want to join in.
Yeah. Well, here they come.
Perfect. I love kids.
Yeah, Tanya, the muscle and the mom.
Hey.
Hi.
You guys want to come say hi?
Yeah.
Hey, Connor, come shake hands. Introduce yourself.
Hello, crew.
Hi.
Did you finish?
No,
Not yet.
we were just in the middle of it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay.
So I have a question about storytelling. So we talked a lot kind of about like the importance of being together and having stories told to us in person and when you're in the present and kind of in the context, and you can get that additional information from elders and like community members. But, and I know because I saw you reading books, which are traditional stories written down and traditional knowledge that's written in books. So what do you think about that? Because I remember when we were in our undergraduate, you were reading stories of the Sweetgrass Cree. But do you think that you kind of lose that context and like human aspect when you actually read it, or that the books don't come across the same?
Wow, that's a good one. I could answer that in two parts.
Okay.
So the first one will be more personal, and the second part will be like what I think some of the Sioux elders I've seen do.
Okay.
So when I was a child, when we were on the Power Trail, my mom would tell me stories, Oktomi stories. They're like stories, but she wouldn't tell me those stories using those names. She would use those names. She would say Aunt Tilly. Aunt Tilly. So it would be all those stories under the pseudonym Aunt Tilly. Why? Because we're respecting the protocol about the winter stories. So we'd get away when we changed the name. That's that cultural red tape I was talking about.
Cultural red tape.
Yeah. So when I picked up that book, the Sweetgrass Cree, for me personally, I was like, holy shit! All these stories are what my mom used to tell me in the camper when we were at Powell's when I was like 6, 7, 8, 9. I've heard these stories before, and so when I went to go tell my mom, I was like, oh my god. They're like, yeah, some of them. Then there was a lot of them I haven't seen, but some of them were very distinct. And I was like, yep, I've heard this story before. It is a very familiar place in my mind. For me, learning them and listening to them and talking about those stories, it's very good, I think, that they're written down, because it ensures that they're kept. So this will come to my second part of the answer. One of my favorite books to read, and I bought the audiobook last year when we were traveling across Canada to Ontario. We drove and we listened to Black Elk Speaks. I learned that like when we were talking about the Sundance, the photo there, like different cultures have different approaches to things. And the more and more I got acquainted with my mom's side, the Sioux side, the more and more I started understanding the big differences between Cree and Sioux culture. I saw the commonalities, but I also understood the differences. And that's when I'm allowed to speak, because I live in both. I think the Crees are very esoteric. You have the knowledge for the Crees is not really easily obtained, but when you could go look in the library and find out all you need to know about a Sioux Sundance. And what I think the Sioux were understanding at one point was through colonialization and contact zones and their time with I guess with Indian sympathizers, for lack of a better term, they understood that the world was changing and their stories might not be told. And they saw that people were capturing stories and keeping them forever. So they saw it as an ideal way to hold them, is to write them down. And that's just a bit of the, just a bit of the story. Because, First Nations people, I think, are generalists. We're not really specialists. We know a little bit about everything. We don't know it all. But that talks about the communal aspect of us. We know a little bit of everything, but when we get together, man, our knowledge base is strong. You put us all in a room, our opinions are deadly. I've seen it. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. When we say, like, there's that adage, I know a little bit about that. It's because when you get all these elders together, all the people together to talk about a certain subject, it's crazy how much communal intellect and communal knowledge of the subject is put out there. It's insane. and that part of the storytelling, everyone knows a little bit of the story. When they come together, they bring in their own experiences. And the way, when you write them down, you have the story there, but that's just a part of the story. There's many more stories to that.
Right.
And having those people there that don't have the written parts, that's important too. So for me, I like it. That's the suicide of me, saying, yeah, our way is the right way to live and everyone should know all about it. And, and if they like it, it's because it's the right way to live.
I'm right, you're wrong, shut up.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But then there's like the orality part where, like, it's good to respect people with the protocol, but it's for Cree people only, or it's for this particular culture only, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's good that it's a very exclusive club.
Yeah.
But does it mean it's right for everyone?
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
I like that Sioux approach where it's like, yeah, this is right for everyone.
Yeah.
just learn it.
Do you know of any community members from like your community out here in Ermineskin that have written down like stories?
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, and how was that received by the rest of the community?
Do they regret it?
I couldn't speak on their behalf.
No.
I guess that's true.
But I have written I have read their writings, their scribes, and they write good things. I mean, they're not printing gossip.
No,
they're,
sometimes.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this story about, Uncle Joe.
Yeah, who spoiled his kids too much.
Pet Cemetery happened.
Yeah.
Like, just FYI.
Yeah. So these guys, like, I know, like, we're really lucky to be here because we have my dad who's an elder. We have one elder here, he passed away last year. He is a big knowledge keeper. And then another 2 knowledge keepers down here within, a country mile. And, growing up here, I just go to their houses and learn and go ask, bring protocol. I remember I was like Connor's age. I was like 11 I was a little older. I was like 11 or 12. And I remember my uncle telling me about residential school and like how crazy it was because we got out of the sweat lodge and he went out first and I went out after him and I noticed this big scar on his back. And I was like, what happened there? And he was like, oh, I was running away from school. And I was like, man, I want to run away from school too. But like his context was totally different.
Right.
I was like, yeah, I feel you. You're so cool. Being a 12-year-old impressionable boy, hearing this old elder is like, yeah, I hate school. It's like, me too, school's out.
The image in my head is just
Like they should have played Alice Cooper Schools
Yeah.
Out. You know, we're
Yes.
crawling out of that sun, the sweat lodge. You know. But you know, but then he started telling me, like, he was like, they did awful things. They Laos, they made us hate our language and our culture, and I was like, what? I was like, what does that mean? And I totally didn't know what it meant, but I understood it happened, but to him, you know. And then my dad would tell me stories, you know, crazy stories, and then Willie, just down the road, Willie Littlechild, like, you know, crazy stories about what happened to them as kids. And these elders here, like, they all have crazy stories about their experiences, which were culminated and put together in the TRC recommendations and final report. I think it's important to write it down. We have Richard Lightning, who wrote in a book about the teepees, late Wayne Roan, who wrote about natural law in a publication, in a very like gray literature publication, with Wilton Littlechild, Dr. Willie Littlechild, that I somehow in his own archive I picked up and copied, and you know, read about what natural law means to Cree.
Yeah.
You know, that's really hard to get your hands on. You know, learning our research techniques and his own library archive in his office. You know, I was able to just check everything out.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen.
Do you ever think like yourself or your dad would ever write down your family stories?
They do.
They do. Okay.
Yeah, my dad does. He writes down for like the last, I don't know, 15 years he's been writing. He procures copies, recordings, photography. The only thing I haven't seen him have is like a map.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
But back when I was a kid, when I was studying, well, I guess I was a kid. I was like 25, 26. I was studying, I had to take, and here's a story from an elder here. He was a Sioux, Mr. Sioux, one of my grandpa. He was telling a story about mermaids, and it was, and I can share that with you, I guess. The story goes, there's this chief, and it's like the story I told you before about Pet Cemetery.
So you're gonna leave us hanging again?
So, well, this one might be a little more rounded. Has all the major elements that we need in this storytelling era. The story goes, this chief, of this prominent chief, had a son who, you know, was about a teenager, and he was a very defiant teenager. They did teenager things, and in the summer, what the warriors did, the young warriors, the teenage warriors, they do is they just ride their horses around and play games. And one particular game they had was, it was like chicken, like who could ride their horses closest to the edge of the cliff. So these three warriors were riding and seeing who would get close. But that chief's son was like, shit, I got the fastest horse here. I look good, I smell good, my hair's great. I could do this. And so he ended up trotting really quickly, just like this little ottoman here. Got real close to the edge, boom, he stopped. And his friend was like, well, I could beat you. You're easy to beat. Boom. His friend came, barreling down, and, got real close to the edge, and the rocks kind of kicked off, but his horse made it farther. Then the third friend, he's like, I could go even further, and he went, and holy smokes, he made it to the end, and then his horse's hoofs kind of went over. That chief's son was like, I can't lose. I'm the chief's son. I have to be the best. So he came and he was riding, and he flew over the edge, and he died. And so his two friends are like, oh shit, what the fuck are we gonna do? So they started riding back to the camp, riding real fast, and we gotta tell his dad. They went to his dad, and he said, look, your son's dead. He fell off the cliff while we're playing the closest to the edge game. His dad was stunned. His dad was sad. He said, well, take me to him. I want to see him. I don't believe that he's dead. So they all got ready. They rode out. They went to the cliff, and he wasn't there. They were astonished. They said, well, what happened? They went looking around. Couldn't find it. They said, we better go back and talk to the elders. Get back into the camp, and they start talking. They said, well, how did his body go missing? And the elders said, well, something must have took him. And if you didn't see any entrails or blood, probably wasn't an animal either. Some spiritual people must have took him. So this one elder, this old man, this old medicine man piped up and he says, I've seen this. He said, it's the people of the water. There's a people that live in the water. There's a tribe in there, a whole different world that we don't know of. And right now I'm just thinking of the Little Mermaid theme song. And so they're like, he's like, man, this is it. And the old man was the father was so sad. He said, well, I'm real sad. I just can't let him go. Because in the Cree way, when you mourn, you take down all their pictures, and you try not to think about him for 4 years, and then after the 4th year, you let him go. And he was really tight with his son, and he didn't want to let him go. Just like the story I was telling you before, he's getting a little bit spoiled, eh? Mm-hmm. Going towards that spoiled story. And this is how Cree works. You got to understand one story to understand another, because they all compound. And that's how our language works too. You understand a little bit of a word, and then it compounds. There's always words behind the stories that make compound words. So anyways, back to the story. That medicine man said, okay, wow, I know this ceremony. I know that will help you see him one last time. But after that, you got to let him go. He said, okay. So they get down to the lake by their camp, and they start doing this ceremony and start praying, singing these songs. And boom, before you know it, his son appears. And that chief is looking at him, and he looks different, his son. He's, dressed differently. It looked like he's matured, He doesn't look as rambunctious like a typical teenager, boy full of hormones. And, there's only a few things going on in that head. He looks very, a little more developed. And he's looking at his son, and he's weeping. He's telling his son, come back. He said, I don't want you to die. I want you to come back. And his father, that's what his father's pleading. And his son says, no, he says, I have a family here now. I have a purpose. I'm fulfilling a calling that I'm doing with this tribe here in this world. You don't need to worry about me because, I'm honoring you by living out these obligations that I'm doing with this world. And so they both hugged. They said goodbye. And that's the end of the story.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's from one of our elders here, the late Sioux, one of my grandfathers, and I had to translate that story from Cree, and they captured it in an old VHS tape at our cultural college here,
right.
And he was explaining that story. And so I was listening to it, and I was like, dang. And so sometimes when I talk to elders around here, they're like, oh yeah, I heard that story. I know which one you're talking about. It's kind of cool because, you heard it. And this story was recorded in 86.
Yeah.
So that's pretty old. That's pretty old. So, those stories, have a lot of meaning. Those two, I guess I shared, have a lot to do with parenting.
Yeah.
They talk about, as a parent, and if I told it to a child, I'm sure the child would have a different perspective and take it from it. And that's what I like about the stories. Just make sure there's snow. Yeah, make sure there's snow. stories.
see some out that
Yeah, yeah.
You're okay.
So those winter stories, they have all that meaning, and like it's almost like fruit that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
You know, you keep on telling the story, and you hear it again, and you're like, holy smokes, that's what it means.
Yeah.
Oh, now I get it. Or, oh, it meant this to me when I was a kid. It was more of a cautionary tale, but now today it's like more of a love story or something. You know, it just changes. So
Yeah.
you keep those stories alive, and they have different meanings because they contain laws, they contain lessons, morals, you know, identity and ideology, philosophy and cosmology. It's all contained in there, and especially when they're told in indigenous languages. That's what they really contain. It's very important to keep those stories either written on video or told orally. I think procuring those stories, whatever medium, or if it's in person, I think you should offer protocol in some capacity, you know, tobacco to whoever was considerate enough to leave those stories for people to hear, and just hold those stories, you know, closely to yourself. I hope that answers all your questions.
For sure. I think it's a good perspective on it. We need to have a good balance.
Well, because this morning I was giving my nieces heck. I was like, if you're gonna go, you know, ask people about treaty, you know, you better make sure you have a lot of protocol, because you start talking about who your uncle is, or your grandpa's, or your mom's, you know, your grandma. Like, make sure you're treating everyone with respect. You know,
Exactly.
It's almost like the mafia.
The mafia. It needs an elder mile.
Yeah, exactly.
A mile away.
You're gonna do some knowledge procurement. You better make sure it's okay with all the big shots.
For sure.
This is totally my jam. Well, a lot of our family stories have to do with death in some way, or like you said, learning a lesson. But our stories, they're more like ghost stories almost, you know, and they're kind of categorized as like supernatural, which I hate that word because it just, I don't know, it irks me in a way, because I don't think that that's what the stories are about. Do you know what I mean?
It's very spiritual.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so a lot of the stories that you told us has to do with natural law and death, and I think that's really beautiful, but I think death is beautiful, so
Yeah.
you know.
No, it's a part of life, right? And living out here, especially with older people, like my dad was like 50 when he had me. I remember as a kid I went to a lot of wakes. Every time we'd go to wakes, just understanding that, you know, it's a cycle, and there's stories and ceremonies that are custom with that, but you know, those rites, just like the pubescent rite, the birth rite, the name-giving rites, the ceremonies, the death rite with the journey songs, those all are, you know, part of our life cycle, and our stories and our languages contain that. You know, and we gotta, you know, keep that going for the kids. Because if they want to tell all other kids what we're doing, then I'm cool with that. I'll tell you whatever you need to know. You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes, like, my niece is 10, and she really likes stories about anything kind of, like you said, you don't like supernatural, but like shapeshifters or like werewolves. Like, she's so into, but it also slightly terrifies her at the same time, but she loves it. She's like, I'm afraid, but I'm intrigued. As I'm like, oh yeah, the werewolves. Like, they're out there. And then she hears like the coyotes howling, and then she's like, oh, they're coming to get me. I'm like,
There's something about it though, you know, like it's almost like macabre, like a lot of Métis folks that I meet, especially from my community, they're either really into it and they're really intrigued by it, or just scared shitless about it.
Well, and I think it's important to like tell the right stories about different things, because like there are things that are more scary than death, right? And I feel people that like have no experience with death, that kind of like natural law and like moving on kind of thing, they're really disturbed. Like, they don't have anywhere to like ground that in. Like, they don't, but it's like stories are really like grounding.
yeah.
Or they can be.
And I think sometimes too, it's interesting, like when you don't even know somebody or you've never really met their family before, and you share very similar stories or like experiences. I was telling so Tanya, I freaked you out one night. I was telling Tanya, we went to Albuquerque together for a conference, and we were just sitting around like sipping some margaritas, having a good time, and I was telling Tanya, we were talking about like ghosts and how sometimes things can appear to you. And so I was telling Tanya, I sometimes, like, I don't know if it's a dream or if it's actually happening, but I constantly have this individual that visits me when I'm sleeping, and they are all red with like black eyes. and they sit like right beside my bed and watch me and like stare me in the face, and I wake up and there's this red person looking at me, and you started to get freaked out. You're like, well, that's the devil, my uncle sees him too. And I was like, shut up. I was like, and then she's like, yeah, but he drives a Cadillac. And I was like, what? That's so funny, because I was like, she's like, yeah, he looks like Darth Maul, right? And I'm like, kind of like without horns. I don't know.
But that's a thing, right? Like, I don't know, as Métis folks, like we get dispossessed, right? But story is a way to connect us together. So
Yeah.
you're connected with my uncle, whether you like it or not.
But then I also told Tanya if the devil's visiting me, like we were sharing a room, so the devil was also visiting her. So.
Yeah, I'm like, nope.
Yeah. She's
Don't
no,
even.
You go sleep out in the like hallway. Like,
Yeah, that'd be freaky.
yeah.
Get out of here with that.
Well, yeah, because it's terrifying. But,
Just make sure you smudge.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what, like, if there's ghosts around, smudge the house.
Yeah.
Well,
I think-
Open the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get really intense about ghost stories.
Oh yeah, no, it's a spiritual thing for real. Like,
Yes.
growing up with spirits, there's a reason why you feel like something's looking at you when you're walking the bush at night. There's reasons why you get the willies when you walk into cold rooms. There's reasons why we don't whistle at night or whistle at the aurora borealis. There's reasons why we don't let the kids play out at night. There's reasons why we tie little threads around the kids' arms when we go to funerals. There's reasons why you hear something, or your favorite cup is moved just a particular way. There's people. We live in both worlds, whether we like it or not. In a Cree perspective, I guess we live that, and they talk to us. They come visit us. Some people that are dead, they're still here. The spirits are still here, and once we accept that and we'll honor that, we do that through our feasts. We feed people, we invite people to come eat with us, and we make offerings, and there's a place for that, and it's good. It's good that you're getting visited by someone, because some people don't get visited by anybody.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's why I think dreams are so important. I talk to a lot of people, and lots of Catholics, they pray out their dreams away because they think it's this weird entity. No, you can't give those away, because those are messages. You can't keep them and keep them sacred to you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right? Dreaming's important.
Dreaming is,
They tell you things. For us here, the big one is, who dreamt about snakes? And you know what that means, though?
No.
Someone's gonna have a baby.
Oh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So like, I'll see my cousin on Facebook. She was like, all right, I had a dream of snakes. Who is it?
Oh,
Wow.
Who is it? So those are some of the things that they tell us messages. They tell us who's gonna be there. Who's gonna. There's many stories out like that. I don't know them all. Like I said, we're all generalists. We don't know it all.
Yeah.
I'm sure if we had a little get together with some gookums, and you ask them about that, they would spill it just about dream meaning. So it's good to get together and talk about these things, because we could pull out a lot of good ideas.
I know that we've been talking a lot about like traditional stories and ghost stories and stuff, but you mentioned gossip. And I think that's an whole aspect of storytelling in itself,
Idle
like,
gossip.
How do you work with that? Like,
I think
whenever our family gets together, it's an hour of gossip, and then we get into like some other stuff.
With us, I think Crees around here are champions of idle gossip. We say, gossip is the devil, or you'll look at some meme on Facebook that's like an indigenous thing, or it's like, gossip's not our way, or traditionally gossip is nothing, and I'm like, that's bullshit. Fucking everybody gossips here. It's a part of our culture, and I think saying gossip's not a part of our culture is like colonialization. Gossip is a part of our culture. It depends how you do the gossip, and because a lot of lessons are talked about, how do you conduct yourself in a way that people are going to remark about you.
Right.
So that really puts the responsibility on yourself. And so if people are going to gossip, it's probably because you made them gossip, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's some double meaning there. But for us, like when I was visiting my uncle, there was Radio Bingo on, and we all went to the kitchen to go listen to Radio Bingo. My wife played it with my cousin. And I'm watching the hockey game with him, and I'm falling asleep on the couch and kind of coming to. And he's very old. How's your uncle? So it's not gossip if you keep out names.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh yeah, he's living over there. He's separated now from my auntie. Did you know he had a kid? The kid's like 15 now or 18. He's just listening. Yeah, he did all that. And he also gave an Indian name to the premier. That was my auntie's name. And they gave her a headdress. I said, but other than that, he's doing okay. He's good.
Well, I don't know, I'm just so fascinated by that because that's a way of relating too, right? Because I don't see my aunties in Manitoba very often, but I hear the gossip and it just makes me feel like I'm close to them even though I don't see them that often. Yeah. It's a weird kind of situation, right?
It's just keeping you in check, and it's like also the community keeping you in check.
Yes.
Yeah, because if everybody knows your business, and like you said, like they're talking gossip about you for a reason.
Oh yeah.
It's keeping you in check. It's not like, because I think a term that gets thrown around a lot now is like lateral violence and stuff, and there's a difference between lateral violence in the community keeping you in check because you're messing up, and you're messing up big time.
Yeah, and there have been times like in my life, that like I was not doing well, and I'm glad people talked about me, and then and now things are better.
Exactly.
I think there's leveling mechanisms within Indigenous cultures that having stuff like that, like gossip, if it's used in a good manner because of the results of someone's action, it levels people out. Either brings them up or pulls them back down to reality.
Yes.
Well, it's still like, even if you're going through a rough time, you're creating your own story, and people are perpetuating your story, right?
Yeah.
So
and then talking, like you said at the very beginning, are you okay? No, I'm not. Well, you're obligated, in each of culture to make sure that they're okay.
The tea.
Yeah. See? Yeah. Oh, I want to hear all about it.
Exactly. Tell me how bad your day was. It was like the first 20 minutes. Who did that right here? Like, Kayla, this is going to be a lot of information for you, but it's coming out. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'll totally just listen to it.
But then we arrive in a good mood.
Yeah.
So.
You just lay everything out on the table.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, we're good.
I think, those things too, from a social perspective, storytelling, that really helps people socially in our communities do well and look out for one another. But you only say it if it's the truth, though, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, of course, yeah.
That's a big part. Yeah, that's a big part of our community. There's an old ceremony where, oh man, I want to tell you guys so much. There's an old ceremony where, and this is a Sioux ceremony, this is what my mom used to say. If two sisters were getting into a dispute, you take a knife, you stab it in the ground, or put it on the table, and you say, look, if I'm going to tell you, if what I'm saying is not true, you can take this knife and stab me. If what you're saying is not true, I'm going to stab you with this knife. That's how you settle disputes. And one time, these two elders, we had to do that. We had to bring them in a sweat lodge, and we had to let them sort these things out because it was starting to affect our community. The chief phoned me, and he was like, we got to do something. That's all I have to say about that. But those mechanisms are still done today to level out, because if there is gossip and it's not true, that's a dangerous one. But if there's the ones that as a result of someone's actions, then that's something else. So those are some of the social stuff that we use to keep our people in check.
My mom, so I have a sister, and when we would bicker back and forth together, my mom would actually duct tape us together.
Oh.
Yeah, until we smartened up. So it's kind of it's along that same lines. I just got visions of me and my sister duct tape,
because you have to live with each other, right?
Yeah.
And what good is being penalized or punished when you guys really just have to make out?
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a kid, when you're duct taped together, it's very quick that you kind of realize the situation is just hysterical.
Yeah. Well, blood is stronger than duct tape, as they say, right?
Yeah.
That's a quote. Blood is stronger than duct tape.
But is it stronger than the willow branch?
That's also pretty strong.
Yeah.
So I know that but we've been chatting for a while now, and we said an hour, so we're going a little over. So I just want to ask you one more question,
Sure.
Josh. And this is a question that we ask pretty much every single person: is what advice? Well, actually, this is a two-part question. Number one, what advice would you give to editors and publishers about how to respect Indigenous stories? And the other question would be, how would you encourage other people, other Indigenous folks, to share their stories?
Well, I'll answer the first part. Is I was just giving it to my nieces this morning about protocol. As researchers, I think, Kayla, you and I could agree too. What's the purpose of your research, right? Is it just for your own gain, or are you going to give it back to the people? Especially when it comes to sensitive stuff like Indigenous knowledge and like history. I think it's important, especially these kids. Like, I'm talking about like 18, 19-year-old kids. Like, may not understand what they're getting into, but they want it. They want to get into it. And it's like, whoa. When I was 18, I just wanted to play drums. Like, like that's all I wanted to do. You know, these kids just want to get into it. And they don't know why, but they gotta. And I told them, like, everything you gotta do with protocol. So for the kids, you know, it would be, or the researchers and publishers, it's just, if you're procuring information from Indigenous folks and you feel a connection to it, well, in person, you should be offering protocol and do it in person. And then the second one is, you know, if you feel like you need to make some type of offering because you read some script or watch some video and you feel connected to that, you know, honor that, because you're not only honoring yourself, you're also honoring that spirit of that person, because we're talking about spirituality, right? Yeah. And those stories have spirits, right? Those stories are alive. Those spirits live, they die, they grow. It's like a flux. So you honor that because everything has a spirit. And what was the second part?
How to encourage other Indigenous peoples to start writing or presenting their stories in whatever way that they want.
Yeah, wow. I always think of artists, like when you say that, or writers. I think the biggest part is, you know, after doing the protocol stuff, be creative. Be as creative as you can. You know, I feel for Indigenous people, like I said, we're generalists. We should be, you know, experiment with our creative side. Because I feel like when you get out into the modern world, you know, the world that we live in today, and say you're talking about Indigenous content or trying to advocate for Indigenous causes, whether it's through policy or art or programming or just having a coffee with a non-Indigenous person. Be creative of how you're explaining it or how you're translating these thoughts into the world. Always remain true to where you got them from. And you do that by showing respect and giving offerings and giving honor to spirits of where those stories or that knowledge came from. But what you do with it is you creative and if you're going to express it in an artist form or an academic form, always, it's like doing citation, you know, just make sure you honor that person because they took the time somewhere in their life, out of their life, to take a dive into that information and bring it out. For yourself doing that, it's good to honor them. But these are my personal opinions, you know. Someone out there might think it's contrary to what they believe, and that's okay too. But that's just what I think. Those are just part of my personal opinions. Because I've lived with artists. We have artists in our family come and talk about our stories. They come and learn about our histories, and then they express it through art. You know, we have academics in our families that have stories that they've learned from our elders in our community that express it through academic works. People that come learn about policy and law, they express it through the law. You know, they have stories. People that learn cultural practice and express it through business. Our culture can be translated into different parts in this modern world, and as long as you honor those people that it comes from, then it's fine. Because you need to encourage creativity. One big thing I always find is, like, when my nieces ask me, how do you uphold treaty? Like, remember we talked about that? And I was thinking, like, here's my chance with these young malleable minds to say, well, you have to be creative. Treaty is not just a gatekeeping mechanism saying, stop, you can't do that, stop, you can't do that, because that's what a lot of people are doing today. A lot of our leaders, it's very common. Even probably in the MMA, you know, Métis rights, it's probably just like, stop, you can't do that, stop, you can't do that. For me, I think hopefully with the younger generation is taking these rights and being creative with them. Let's build something with them. See this Section 35? They say it's an empty box. Some people hate that, some people love it. But either way, it's a room to grow and create and define and enshrine. And we need creative people out there to create these things. Of course, up until this point, we're like, no, you know. But today, now, it's like, okay, let's create things. Let's get that creative spark, you know, the glitter. Let's create something magic. Let's see something be created out of this, rather than just saying stop. That's what I think. As long as we know, you know, those stories that tell us about the treaty, or even the orality parts rather than the written, we honor that and create something out of it.
Yeah.
That's good. That's all I like to say about that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for the drink.
Oh,
yeah,
you're welcome.
you're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, and we're going to end off here, and we will see you for another episode of Masinahikan Iskwêwak.